Hi everyone, it's Kathy. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'll be sharing how I created two cards using the new Spiders and Webs die set. And these spiders are so fantastically creepy, and they die cut with really spindly thin legs. The webs die cut beautifully. They're super delicate. I'll also be using the new Eek word and shadow die set. And I'm also going to be bringing in the Chills, Shivers, and Goosebumps die set and the Halloween postage stamp set, just to use a couple of the sentiments from there. I'm going to start out with the slimline card, and to save some time, I've done all the die cutting off camera. So here I die cut the spider webs from vellum. And vellum can be tricky because it is so delicate, and these dies, well, the die cuts are very delicate once you run them through your machine. But I did want to share a couple of tips when die cutting vellum. I did use a metal shim when I ran it through my Gemini Junior. I don't know that you would have to because the dies are really good quality. I wanted to add a little bit of shimmer or sparkle to my spider webs, but I wanted it to be subtle. And again, with vellum, it can be tricky because if it gets too wet with ink or something like that, it can start to curl and it's really hard to adhere it down. So to get my shimmer and shine on my spider webs, I decided to use my Wink of Stella glitter pen. And I was pretty random about it. I didn't try and get every little tiny spot on the web. I just wanted to have a little bit of shimmer on them. So after I was done with that, I set that aside and started to work on my background piece. I cut a piece of cardstock just slightly smaller than 3.5 by 8.5, and I did some ink blending. I started out with melon ice, and I did that just down the center of the piece of cardstock, and then I did the outer edges with Garden Party. I'll make sure to have everything that I used listed in the description box below for you. Now with these inks, they look a little bit blotchy, but when I go to put the card together, you'll see just how much those inks settled into the cardstock and really leveled out and blended very nicely. So once I was done with the ink blending with the bright green inks, I had to add some water splatter, and then I decided I needed to add some shimmer, so I used my Perfect Pearls for that. And then I decided that I needed some black splatter, so I just used a black ink pad and a wet paintbrush to do that. Next, I die cut a piece of gray cardstock using the Wobbly Windows slimline die, and then I used blackjack ink just to add some color around the edges. And again, it looks really dark when I first apply it, but as the ink settles in, it does dry back a little bit. And I did spray that with a little bit of water just so I could have some water splatters on my slimline wobbly window die cut piece as well. So to adhere these little spider webs, oh mine, and especially because they're die cut from vellum, I didn't want to have the adhesive show through. So what I used was a Zig two-way glue pen, and this particular one I purchased on accident. I thought it was a chisel tip, but it turned out to be a ballpoint pen, which made it perfect to apply to the spider webs. When I was applying the adhesive on the back of the spider webs, I was literally just tracing the die cuts, and I didn't try to get it all over the back of the spider webs. I did want some of the pieces of the spider webs to be loose so they would lift up just a little bit. After I had my spider webs adhered to my wobbly window panel, I used my tape runner and adhered it to my green ink blended panel. And to adhere these super creepy spiders, I used some black foam squares on the back of my spiders so that they would be popped up a little bit. For the word Eek, I just adhered that flat with liquid glue, but I wanted to have that middle E to be kind of tangled in the web, so I was careful about the placement there. Once I had the word Eek adhered in place, I added my other two spiders, which already have the black foam squares on the backside of them. And then I adhered that panel to the front of a black note card, which started out at 8.5 by 7. I scored it at 3.5 inches on the 7-inch side. So my finished card measures 8.5 by 3.5. Once I had that adhered on my card panel, I did trim off some of the overhanging spider webs with my scissors. And to finish it up, I used my glossy black Nuvo drops just to add a few drops here and there. Moving on to the second card, I started out with a piece of cardstock that measures 4.25 by 5.5. I dabbed a little bit of purple ink on my silicone mat and spritzed it with some water. Then I used a little scrap of acetate that I had to do some ink smushing because I wanted that ink to be very concentrated in one area, and I tend to get ink everywhere when I do ink smushing. So I guess the acetate gives me a little bit more control over where the placement of the ink is. If the ink was pooling, I just used my grimy stamp cleaning rag to dab that up. And once I was done with the light purple ink, I brought in a darker purple ink and spritzed it with some water just to add some splatters with my paintbrush. Once that panel was completely dry, I used a piece of painter's tape just to mask off the very bottom portion of my card panel. And I added some, I don't know what that's called. I guess it's like a chevron pattern. It's one of the stamps from the Micro Patterns stamp set. I wasn't too worried about getting them lined up perfectly. It's a Halloween card, so Halloween cards can be wonky. I cut a thin strip of black cardstock and adhered that to the front. Next, I ran it through my die cut machine with the wavy pierced rectangle die set, and I actually set the die a little bit wonky so that stripe at the bottom would be more at an angle. I die cut the words chills and shivers from black cardstock and just used liquid glue to adhere that to the front of the panel. And here comes the super creepy spindly leg spider. I put a black foam square on the back of that creepy spider's body and popped him up on the front of the card. Next, I adhered that panel to a piece of black cardstock that's just slightly larger. And then I used a couple of the words from the Halloween postage stamp set with some purple ink just to fill in some of the spaces between the die cut words and that super creepy spindly legged spider. After I had those stamped, I adhered that panel to the front of a top folding white note card. And to finish it up, I wanted to make that super creepy spindly legged spider even more creepy. I used my black Nuvo drops, and I was pretty heavy-handed with it to make the body very dimensional and glossy. And that's it. That finishes up my cards for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, we'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.